Representations versus terms. Representations and terms are two fundamental concepts in contract law that hold critical implications for the rights and obligations of the parties involved. Understanding the distinction between these concepts is essential for contract law specialists, as it influences the remedies available in case of a breach or misstatement. Representations are statements made by one party to another before or at the time of contracting, which induce the contract but do not form part of the contract itself. In contrast, terms are promises or obligations that are incorporated into the contract and are legally binding. Mastering the differentiation between representations and terms is crucial for effective contract management and dispute resolution. A comprehensive framework for distinguishing between representations and terms involves examining the intention of the parties, the timing of the statement, and the reliance placed on it. One practical tool is the objective test, which assesses what a reasonable person in the position of the parties would have understood the statement to mean at the time the contract was formed. For instance, in the case of Oscar Chess-Litted v. Williams, the court held that a statement regarding the age of a car was a representation rather than a term because the seller relied on information from the logbook and did not possess expert knowledge. This case highlights the importance of considering the expertise and knowledge of the parties when determining the nature of a statement. The distinction between representations and terms also affects the remedies available. If a representation is false, the aggrieved party may seek rescission or damages for misrepresentation, depending on whether the misrepresentation was fraudulent, negligent, or innocent. In contrast, a breach of contract term entitles the aggrieved party to remedies for breach of contract, such as damages or specific performance. The type of term breached, whether it is a condition, warranty, or innominate term, further influences the remedies. For example, a breach of condition allows the innocent party to terminate the contract and claim damages, whereas a breach of warranty only entitles the party to damages. A practical framework for classifying terms is the classification test, which examines the importance of the term to the overall contract. Conditions are fundamental terms that go to the root of the contract, while warranties are less significant and do not affect the core contractual obligations. Innominate terms, characterized by the Hong Kong Fur Shipping Co. Ltd. v. Kawasaki Kisen Kaisha Ltd. case, require an assessment of the consequences of the breach to determine the appropriate remedy. This approach allows for flexibility and justice in addressing breaches that may not neatly fit into the traditional categories of conditions or warranties. An actionable insight for contract law specialists is the careful drafting of contracts to clearly delineate between representations and terms. This involves explicitly stating which pre-contractual statements are intended to be binding terms and which are merely representations. Clauses known as entire agreement clauses can be employed to exclude liability for pre-contractual representations, thereby reducing the risk of disputes. However, these clauses must be carefully drafted to ensure they do not inadvertently exclude liability for fraudulent misrepresentation, which cannot be contractually excluded. In practice, a step-by-step approach to analyzing representations and terms in a contract begins with identifying all pre-contractual statements made by the parties. The next step is to apply the objective test to ascertain whether the parties intended these statements to be binding terms or mere representations. This involves considering the language used, the context of the negotiations, and the reliance placed on the statements. Once the classification is made, the contract should be drafted or reviewed to incorporate these statements appropriately, using clear and unambiguous language to reflect the parties' intentions. To illustrate the real-world application of these principles, consider the case study of Esso Petroleum Co. Ltd. v. Marden, where a prediction about the future sales volume of a petrol station was held to be a representation rather than a contractual term. The court reasoned that the statement was an estimate based on the company's expertise and was not intended to be a guarantee. This case underscores the need for parties to be cautious when making forecasts or predictions during negotiations, as these are typically treated as representations and may expose the party to liability for misrepresentation if they prove to be inaccurate. Statistics indicate that misrepresentation claims constitute a significant portion of contract disputes, emphasizing the importance of understanding the distinction between representations and terms. A study by the International Institute for Conflict Prevention and Resolution found that misrepresentation was a key issue in 35% of contract-related disputes. This highlights the practical relevance of mastering these concepts for professionals involved in contract drafting and dispute resolution. In conclusion, the distinction between representations and terms is a cornerstone of contract law, with significant implications for the rights and obligations of contracting parties. By employing objective tests, classification frameworks, and careful contract drafting practices, contract law specialists can effectively navigate these concepts to minimize disputes and ensure contractual clarity. Real-world examples and case studies, such as Oscar Chess Letid v. Williams and Esso Petroleum Colid v. Marden, provide valuable insights into the practical application of these principles. As professionals continue to encounter complex contractual scenarios, the ability to accurately identify and classify representations and terms remains an essential skill for effective contract management and dispute resolution.